I am currently rated, let's see, I am currently rated 1398. So we're up to a pretty high rating. And this is where it kind of starts getting more fun for certain players. And we're playing, I think, our first 1500. Okay, so in the last couple of games, we've been playing the Sicilian Accelerated Dragon, which is where Black Fiantetto is the bishop. And I highly recommend the Accelerated for people in the 1300 range who are looking to learn a new opening, because it's quite approachable. It's easy to learn, and it can give you very good positions if white doesn't know what to do. So this move c3 is already kind of a mistake because it obstructs that square from the knight. And now the knight will have no good square. So we should simply continue developing here. Obviously, we can't take the pawn because there's two defenders, and I can't draw arrows, and then two attackers. So let's just continue developing our pieces. And he goes f3. Now, this is a very common mistake. We've seen several people go f3 in these kinds of positions. It looks okay because he defends the pawn. But we already know that this creates weaknesses around white's king that we can exploit. In what way? How do we open up the center here? Another move that we've seen many times. Let me just open the window. How do we open up the center in order to exploit the weaknesses caused by this move? We go d5. We go d5, and that's also the power of the Sicilian. This move is often just very strong because this square is nicely supported by... Well, I drew 4 arrows, and none of them were the one that I wanted to draw. That's a new world record. Okay, so d5... and he can't keep the center closed. He basically has to take, or he can take the knight. We would take with the pawn. Okay, he tries to keep the center closed. And I'll take this opportunity. Wait, what happened? Pataguchi, thank you for the sub. Okay, someone said something funny and I missed it. So in such a position, the concept of keeping the tension is incredibly important. A lot of players, they sort of want to resolve the tension. If there's a lot of pieces hanging in the air, they want to always make sure that that tension is resolved and doesn't exist. But sometimes we can just continue developing, and at the end of the day, we're going to benefit. So we can actually win a pawn here, but I want to show this concept in this game. And the move that we're going to play is just castles. Okay, we're not doing anything. We're just developing, and we're letting our opponent be the one. Okay, so he also castles. Now it's time for us to win a pawn. How do we go about winning a pawn? There's two main captures here. We can play d takes e4 or knight takes d4. How do we decide? Which one should we do? Who can tell me? Thank you, Hitstick, for the prime. One of these captures wins a pawn. The other does not. Very good. Knight takes d4 wins a pawn. D takes e4 would have allowed the intermediate move. Knight takes c6. Now we take on e4, exposing the attack on d4. Do we take on d4 immediately? We do not, because white's queen defends the pawn. But hey, we played the Accelerated Dragon, and that is exactly why. This bishop is incredibly strong. It comes into the game in many positions. We've won a pawn. That's a pretty good start. But obviously, that's not going to win us the game. We need to continue developing our pieces. We haven't completed our development. We still have this bishop. Where can this bishop go? Only one square, and that's e6. It can't go to d7. Queen b6 would have been a good move as well, connecting the rooks. That might be our next move. I'm anticipating probably... Okay, queen c2. The move queen c2 is weird. It doesn't really accomplish anything. In fact, the queen is quite vulnerable on this square. Can we exploit that vulnerability through a targeted move? What can we do here? We can go rook c8, and we can attack the queen. That's always a good idea. We bring the rook into the game, and we attack a queen, so we do it with tempo. Now it's time for us to deploy our other rook, but that's not possible because, well, that would be an illegal move. Rook f8 is not possible because our queen is there. So our task then is to move the queen onto a square, vacate that square for the rook, but we don't want to move the queen just anywhere because the queen also fulfills the crucial duty of defending the bishop. So let's move it out of the d file. That way rook d1 does not actually pin the bishop. So this move contains a lot of benefits. In addition, it kind of attacks b2. Okay, so bishop h6 we don't care because we wanted to do this anyway. Rook fd8. And now all of our pieces are in the game. Our rooks are in open files, our bishops are in tremendous squares, and our queen is in the game. When that happens, it's like there's a clicking, there's a clicking sound, everything has clicked into place. Now it's time to nurture the advantage and find ways to tighten the screws. And what does that mean? What do we do specifically here? There's a couple of ways to go about this position. One way is to improve pieces even further. The other way is to identify annoying pieces on our opponent's side and eliminate them. And this bishop on h6 kind of annoys me. It annoys me because it limits the king. It creates attacking potential. And if we trade that bishop, this bishop is kind of lame. Now, what would be the best way to trade the bishop? It would not actually be bishop to g7, because bishop to g7 allows his bishop to move along this diagonal. Bishop to e3 is the move that we're going to play. The second reason this move is good is because when he takes the bishop, because he basically has no other choice, we will take with a queen, and that queen from b6, okay, he does have a choice. He can blunder his bishop, which is what he did. Now we got the best of all worlds. What I was going to say is that if he takes on e3, we take with a queen. Our queen is incredibly well placed. It attacks the bishop on e2. It pressures the pawn on e4. And all around, it just exerts tremendous pressure on white's position while also keeping a7 defended. That's the ideal role for the piece. And a lot of... excuse me. Let me just take a sip of water. I'm losing my voice. So we could have also exchanged the queens with a move like queen c6. I was thinking about that. Now, a lot of people don't consider this kind of move because they feel like it weakens this diagonal subconsciously. Oh my god, there's going to be a queen that lands on g7 with checkmate. But you want to be very realistic and you want to be very practical at this level. And what that means is sometimes you want to make a move that makes you feel uncomfortable if it accomplishes a very specific aim. And if you're tactically confident, then you're also going to be confident in your ability to make these kinds of moves and override your maybe intuitive instincts that are telling you something is wrong with a move. So anyways, we're going to take a closer look at the game afterward, but let's play another one. And then we're going to look at games in batches of 2. That's just sparkling water. Let's go e4. And he plays the Sicilian. Now, the opening that we're going to play here is the c3 Sicilian, an opening that I also played in my childhood, as we saw. And he actually finds the correct response. He strikes immediately in the center. The basic idea of the c3 Sicilian is, of course, to play d4. You're trying to control the center, and you're trying to do so with pawns, and you're trying to do so while maintaining general health of the position. And what are the drawbacks of the c3 Sicilian? The first is that the c3 pawn obstructs, as we saw in the previous game, the knight. And the second is that we spend some time moving our pawns, so our opponent does get a small lead in development, which we need to remedy as early as possible. So let's try to remedy that by developing our own pieces. Okay, bishop g4 pins the knight on f3. And as we already know, the best way to unpin is by developing our bishop with bishop e2. We'll talk about the trade. That's an important point, but we will talk about it. Okay, so he goes e6. Now, one of the keys to understanding the Alapin is understanding the knight on b1. Where can this knight on b1 go? People look at the knight, they think, okay, it has to go to d2, but d2 is kind of lame because it blocks the bishop in on c1. But the knight actually has a very interesting maneuver that makes the Alapin tick. Where else can the knight go? Go to a3. What is it doing on a3? Didn't you say knights on the rim are grim? Well, they are. But that knight is heading to b5. He stops us. But b5 isn't the only square the knight can go. Or c4, and now it's actually going to b6. So when you're looking at a piece, remember I talked about kinetic and potential energy. You want to look at where it's ultimately going, not only where it's currently placed. And that's a very important distinction. Because sometimes you look at a piece and you just dismiss, that piece is terrible. But it's actually, in the airport waiting for its connection flight to frickin' Venice. Okay, this guy's playing well. Okay. How do we continue? Now, believe it or not, we have a chance to increase the pressure here because he has not developed his king side. So if we can find a way to attack something, he'll have a hard time defending it because he just doesn't have the forces mobilized. He's moved his queen around. Queen a4 would be a good idea, but he has b5 covering it and forking our queen on the knight, but you're very close. Bishop g5 also doesn't really accomplish anything because the pin is not that dangerous. But in my opinion, the only way to actually make a serious threat here is queen to b3. That's the move we're going to play. And again, after the game, I'll explain this move more deeply. But now we're going to position this knight on e5, and look how far this knight has gone. It started from a3, and now it's nicely centralized on e5. So one of the reasons that go c4, which is actually, I think, good for us. Let's bring the queen back. And one thing that he's been doing here is he's really overextending his pawns. And we're going to exploit that with a very thematic move. First, let's eliminate that annoying bishop. Okay. Now, let's try to exploit this pawn chain. Now, when I say exploit this pawn chain, I usually mean attacking the base of the pawn chain. Pawn on a6 cannot be attacked. b3 would be attacking the tip of the pawn chain. That would be sort of a conceptual mistake. Let's go a4 to try to undermine. This is what undermining is. You attack the base of something. It's like you remove the Jenga and the whole. It's been years since I played that game. This guy is actually really, really good. He's definitely well over 1400. Now let's position the knight on g5, exposing the attack on his knight. Second idea of this move is to position the bishop on f3 on an open diagonal to attack the rook. Once that rook is attacked, it has to move away from the a file. Look what else is on the a file. Our rook. Our rook will potentially be able to land on a6, exerting even more pressure on his position. Let's take it and open the file. Now, one thing that's important to understand, this phrase, the threat is stronger than its execution. Sometimes you don't want to make a move that looks tempting. You want to sort of keep it in reserve. You want to keep it in reserve, and you want to complete your development first, so that we only play rook a6 when absolutely necessary. So let's deploy our other pieces, our rook. We castled, and let's wait for a more appropriate moment for rook a6. Okay, he's attacking our pawn. Let's defend it. Yeah, this guy is playing, I would say, like a 23-2400 right now. So bishop f4 here would be a very good move, for example. Not a 1400 level move. Okay, h6, knight e4. He doesn't leave us a choice. Bishop takes c4. So right now we're just recapturing pieces. And let's see, knight f6. Okay, f5 is a mistake. Why is f5 a mistake? Can somebody explain, in my opinion, of course, maybe I'm wrong, but why is this a positional, at least a dubious move positionally? e6 is right. So it weakens the pawn on e6, and that pawn is very attackable. In fact, we've positioned our rook there. Now, do you guys remember I said the threat is stronger than its execution? There's a certain move we did not play earlier because it wasn't that strong. It's time for that move. Our rook is moving into c6 in order to try to break up the connection between his queen and his bishop. It's okay to lose. Well, this guy is very, very competitive. I'll say that he's extremely underrated. Knight f6 is a good move. And now we need to decide how to proceed. But we have I think we have a fork. We actually have a fork. We have a fork, and it's not the most clear-cut of forks, but it is a fork. That fork is bishop c6, forking his pawn and his rook. Now, one moment. Okay. So let's see what he does. If he goes rook b8, okay, we're going to take the pawn. If he had gone rook b8, we would have taken e6. Now we take this pawn. Remember I told you he weakened his pawn chain? Well, this is the result of it. We finally managed to exploit it. Maybe he's doing a speedrun too. Then we'd be both doing speedruns. He's making some really good moves and some not so good moves. Of course, I might be wrong. So we will see. He also, again, people play well. I mean, that's just the state of affairs in chess. Knight to e4. He's centralizing his knight. Okay. I don't like that. I find this knight to be quite annoying. Can we get rid of this knight? Can we get rid of this knight? I mean, can we... But don't even think about playing f3. Ugh. Without weakening all of these squares around our king. Bishop c6. Let's go back to c6, chasing the knight away. And the move f3 would just create a lot of weaknesses on the king side. That would be the issue, primary issue with that move. And I do have videos like this on YouTube, and plenty of them, and I'm uploading more. Capablanca loves to lose, exactly. So, let's see what he ends up doing. Queen e2 didn't really do much. Oh, I guess he wanted to attack c4. Yeah, that would have been possible. Queen e2 would have been possible as well, to attack the pawn on c4, but I like this a little bit more because by taking the knight we can stabilize the situation. Now he's attacking f2, so let's defend that with bishop e3. Let's defend the pawn with bishop e3. Now bishop f4 would be a strong move on his end, trying to remove the defender, and he doesn't. So let me think for a second. This guy's definitely making me think. Let's bring the queen in. Let's bring the cavalry in. Sometimes when our opponent is applying pressure, we want to bring as many defenders as possible into the game. And hopefully this queen is going to lend enough support to the king in order to ward off the immediate threats. And if he takes the bishop, we can just take with the pawn. I realize that it could be scary to open up the f-file when his rooks are doubled there. But on the other hand, our rook defends f1. And the reality is he doesn't have any entry points. He can go to f2, but that doesn't really threaten anything. This is that emphasis I made on concreteness. This is the emphasis I made on not falling for the way that something looks and just assuming that it's dangerous, for example. And this is, I think, a very good position for us. Why not pick the pawn on e6? Well, that's our plan. That's our plan, but we don't have time for that yet. We need to first attend to our king. Yeah, rook on a6 is incredibly strong. It's like exerting this pressure on his position. He's also running short of time. Okay. Don't rely too much on heuristics when you can calculate. Well, queen c8 we can still probably take on e6 because we have 2 attackers and 1 defender. Okay, queen b7 is a good move. Let's take on e6. He's going to take on b2. And he's threatening queen f2 check. Now that's an annoying threat because that would win the rook. So let's move his rook away. Let's move the king when he's going to lose on time. He's going to lose on time. Again, he played extremely well. By the way, our last move sets up a little battery against the g7 pawn. Wow, that was a tough game. I think I played quite well. And can I check his accuracy? Sure. I don't think it was absurdly high. Let me see. 88.3 and ours was 87.7. So, yeah, I mean, he played really well, but he made mistakes. So, I just think this guy is super underrated, and I don't think he's up to anything. Yeah, he's better than me, exactly. But yeah, more accurate than us, and I'm actually like trying. You know, I'm actually trying to find good moves. Thank you, Kanako the Squirrel, for the prime. Appreciate the sub. So, I don't know. I mean, yeah, he was playing defensively, and he found some obvious moves. He also found some good moves. But it is what it is. Anyways, he took a little bit too long finding these moves. Okay, so let's go over the 2 games, and then we will continue. Now, basically, in this first game, in the Accelerated Dragon, the move f3 is very typical. I've seen several people actually do this precise thing. They'll play c3 to support the knight, and then they'll play f3 to support the pawn, and both of these moves are bad. And as I explained, the reason c3 is bad is because it takes the c3 square away from the knight. And that is just not good. You want to develop that knight to c3. So usually people just play knight c3 and bishop e3 to defend the knight. And there's a checklist that you want to go through when you feel like one of your pieces is going to be attacked. There are several ways you can defend against an attack. One is to move a piece from a square. But that can be bad because that doesn't develop anything. But what you want to make sure of is that when you're defending a piece with a pawn, you're not also taking away crucial squares from your other pieces, or you're not weakening your position. So this is a form of tunnel vision at like a 1500 level. As you guys know from my sessions with Charlie, I've defined this term tunnel vision to mean overemphasis on a particular factor of the position. And at like a beginner level, beginner, tunnel vision usually results in like a queen blunder. Like you'll look at one side of the board and you'll forget about the other side of the board and you blunder the queen. 1500s don't tend to do that, but what 1500s tend to do is they'll make a move that has a very specific purpose, such as defending a pawn or a piece. They will forget that that move also contains very significant long-term drawbacks. How did I know to pull the trigger? Well, because he played f3 and opened up his position. We go d5. Here we just castle. And that can be the solution to a lot of problems. You don't need to force anything. I don't like the move e5. This is a move a lot of people would play. Let me explain why exactly I think this is a mistake. There's several reasons. The first is that it helps him untangle his pieces. It's actually a good thing for him to trade knights because this knight on d4, as we saw in the game, is actually vulnerable. Second is that it blocks the bishop. I hate this. I hate the fact that it blocks the bishop because the bishop, this position is the most important piece. So it's the same exact thing. You want to make sure that a move which seems tempting doesn't contain more drawbacks than strengths. So we castle, and now we take the pieces in the right order. If we had taken on e4 first, he could have taken the knight first. So always check for in-between moves. Don't just assume that he's going to recapture the same piece or pawn. And now once he captures, his knight defends the pawn safely. So knight takes d4 is the reason. It's the reason why we played this move and then this move, opening up the attack on the pawn on d4. The rest is very simple. We take the pawn. We complete our development. We attack the queen. We bring our own queen out. We activate the rook. And now we trade his best piece. The concept of looking for your opponent's best piece and trading it is, I would say, well, okay, if people are like taking notes or something, this is like my chess philosophy. So I can formulate positional chess, right? People hear the term, thank you, Calicash, for the tier 1. People hear the term positional chess and they freak out. Oh, positional GMs, positional chess only for GMs. But the reality is positional chess itself is a simpler concept than people realize. And in my opinion, if I had to define positional chess in 3 separate concepts, they would be the following. 1, improving the placement of your own pieces. 2, trading good pieces for bad pieces or bad pieces for good pieces. Either your bad piece for your opponent's good piece, or, well, I guess that's the only good way to do it, but your opponent could also be trading his good piece for his bad piece for your good piece. And then the third method is, of course, provoking weaknesses. Okay, provoking weaknesses in your opponent's territory. So improving, provoking, and trading. I think that these, now this is not the extent of it, but these are the bases, the 3 bases of sort of positional chess. And doing either of those things isn't that hard per se. Observing, making the right observations that lead to those things aren't necessarily that difficult. And I think some people need to get over their fear of positional chess and start thinking like that. So let me give you an example of where things can get a little bit hard. And people often hear the term positional chess and tactics overlap. What does that mean? What does it mean for positional chess and tactics to overlap? And why can that make something more difficult? Let me give a good example before we move on with the speedrun. And then we will look at the second game and then we will move on. So please give me a second because I also need to keep opening ChessBase and my game collection to be able to pull up pertinent examples from the games. This is from the under 14 World Championship in Vietnam. So Min will be happy I'm showing this game. And I won this game in the end, but Benjamin played a very instructive move here in the following position. Okay. So we are taking the side of Benjamin here. It is black to move in this position. Now, first of all, when you look at this endgame, who is better here? Like, what is the snapshot picture that you get? Who is, and thank you, Delicitous, thank you guys for all the compliments. I really appreciate it. This keeps me going, and this is awesome. So why is white better? Yeah, white is better. White is better for three very specific reasons. Reason number 1 is the fact that black has a very bad backward pawn. This backward pawn can be attacked if I put my queen on f3. Reason number 2, as many of you guys are pointing out, is the disparity in the position of the knights. Black's knight is terrible, white's knight is amazing. Does anybody see reason number 3? This is a pretty nice question. I'll give you guys a hint. Reason number 3 is related to the fact that this is an endgame. There's something you need to look for when you're in an endgame. Not really. Discovery ideas, I'm not sure what you're referring to exactly. It's not the king placement. White's king being open is something that is in black's favor. So outside pass pawn, yes, a couple of you guys are noticing this. White has the idea, potentially, of creating the outside pass pawn. That is the pass pawn that is furthest from all the other pawns with the move h4, potentially. Why would this be important? Because if we have a pawn endgame, the side that can create the outside passer usually holds a pretty big advantage. But black has a lot of problems on his hands, and Benjamin found the way to solve them. Black to play and make the most out of this difficult situation. Black to play and make the most out of this difficult situation. He found a very nice, what I would call a positional tactic. And some of you are pointing it out already. I want to give people a moment to think about it. So the move f5, I can just play e takes f5 because my queen is also reinforcing the knight. So undermining the knight is a good idea, but that's not quite going to cut it. Yes. So as many of you are pointing out, the move is knight e7. Now, doesn't this blunder a knight? It does not. This is where the tactical element comes in. I have to take, or he takes my knight. Check. Trading the bad knight for the good knight. Forking. Queen takes c7. We have a queen endgame. And in the queen endgame, the fact that my king is very weak should give black enough to make a draw. Now, I managed to win this game. I kind of finagled my way into creating a passed pawn. But basically, this is a very simple example of trading a bad piece for a good piece. And I can give you a million of these examples. This is positional chess. That's all there is to it. It's not that complicated per se, but that's why it's very important to have this kind of practice. Now, we had 2 donations that I failed to recognize as I was talking. Hitstick donated $5, saying, incredibly informative, easily digestible lessons. I look forward to seeing more of your amazing content. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Astro Darwin donated $10 just a couple seconds ago. Thanks for doing this. This is the right speed. Very happy to hear that. Thanks to both of you for the incredible generosity. What if I had played knight e3, preserving the knights? Well, it's important to recognize that now white's knight is no longer good. And also, I drop either of these pawns. So this is basically not a good thing. I can find, if you guys want another good example, let's just do one more example of this, because this is very important for a lot of people to kind of master the, I guess, the art of sort of automatically detecting what your worst place piece is and then trading it for one of your opponent's better pieces, or just improving it in general. And a lot of maneuvers can be demystified through the lens of positional thinking, through the lens of one of these 3 things. This is a position that I had when I was already a GM, 2014. And in this position, I had just won a piece, but my opponent attempted to win the piece back with the move f6. And in this position, I found a very strong move. But this move is very hard to find unless you specifically try to understand the drawback of the move f6. Like when we look at the move f6, we understand its strengths because its strengths are very obvious. It forks the bishop and the knight. Its drawbacks are much harder to sort of recognize. But you guys are on the money right now. People are on a roll. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to think about this. Bishop e2 is correct. Very nice. Bishop e2. Basically going to c4. The move f6 exposes the diagonal. The queen and the king are on the same diagonal. Therefore, you should always be thinking about pins if you have a bishop. My opponent has to cover this diagonal with e6. Let's apply the same thinking. I played bishop c4, queen d6. What is the drawback of the move e6? Very specifically. And how does white exploit it? What do we do in this position in order to keep the extra piece? Yeah, but I know, like, maybe I wouldn't see this in Blitz either, but, like, now we're taking a closer look at these games, so hopefully people can start, like, thinking about this kind of stuff. So, what is the drawback of the move e6? Yeah, g4 is correct, and you're just trapping the bishop. So e6 covers the bishop's escape route back to d7. The bishop is now trapped. I preserve my extra piece, and my opponent resigned. So very, very simple stuff, but this illustrates the importance, and I include this under the realm of positional chess, detecting the drawbacks of your opponent's move. Positional thinking, the drawbacks are just more subtle. You know, a tactical drawback could be something like weakening the king. Positional drawback could be more subtle, such as exposing. I guess it's somewhere in between, exposing a diagonal in which both the queen and the king are located. Okay? What if he didn't play e6? Well, there's just no other way to defend against bishop c4. If he plays king h8, then this is just absolutely crushing. So, anyways, let's go back to the speedrun. We have one more game to quickly look at before we move on. And that is that very tightly contested game in the Alpen Sicilian. Thank you, Binary Steen, for the tier 1. Now, basically, okay, so in the beginning, we played the mainline Alpen. Now, my opponent correctly did not capture on d4. And this, again, relates to the concept of keeping the tension, because this now creates the c3 square for the knight. Therefore, you want to keep these pawns here so that my c3 pawn stops the knight from developing. And so the knight has to seek alternate arrangements, which it does. Queen d8 is theory. And now the move queen b3. I want to explain this move, and then I want to move on. Now, what is the purpose of provoking b5? And to explain this, I want to share another element of my chess philosophy, which is that people misunderstand the concept of pawns moving forward. So this might sound a little arrogant, like I know everything. I know very little. So take this with a grain of salt. My views might change. But basically, whenever someone moves a pawn, by definition, weaknesses are created in the position because pawns don't move backwards. So squares that were formerly controlled by pawns are no longer controlled by any piece. Oh my. This was the missing piece. This was the missing piece. And he has arrived. Gem Taco with 10 gifted subs. Oh my. Okay, I'm done. I'm walking away. Goodbye, guys. I'm spilling more tea, and I'm walking away. This 10,000 bits. Yeah, the context, Gem. Look at the sub count. Earlier today, we had, I don't even know how to explain the stream. And this was the missing piece. Oh my lands. 10 subs followed by 10,000 bits. What is this? Oh, 3160. Yeah. This is on. Thanks for the fat 10 gift subs. Look at the bit leaderboard and the sub leaderboard. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Thank you. Gem Logic gifted 150. This will not be my last speedrun. I have a feeling it won't be. But before I was rudely interrupted by Gem, I was just kidding. Thank you so much. I was sharing why b5 is a bad move. So I was saying that by definition, when you move a pawn, you create weaknesses left behind. Like these squares, c6 is no longer controlled. But in addition, the pawns themselves become more vulnerable. Okay, and if you think about it, if you're playing Capture the Flag, I love Capture the Flag. I don't know about you guys. Okay, sorry. This makes me miss Capture the Flag in 6th grade. That is one of the few games that I'm good at. If you're playing Capture the Flag, you know those guys who always jump across the fence and then jump immediately back? I was one of those people. You know what I'm talking about. It's a bit of a abstruse reference. But you can think of chess as like a game of Capture the Flag. The moment you cross the horizon, you can be targeted by the opponent, and the same goes for pawns. As soon as the pawns move away from their starting positions, they become more vulnerable because it is more difficult to defend them with pieces. If you think about it, black could have gone queen c7 here and very easily protected the pawn. He can protect it also even with rook a7. But if you fast forward to the move a4, it's very difficult to protect this pawn. This pawn is outside the range of black's pieces. And so like it's hard to support it because now the rook on a8 is also hanging. And the same goes for the c4 pawn. If we play b3, we undermine the pawn. And so this entire campaign was to provoke his pawns into moving forward. When people look at pawns moving forward, they assume, oh, the opponent is grabbing space, like it's bad for us. But you should really be careful about how you understand the movement of pawns, because oftentimes it creates more weaknesses than I guess more harm than good is done. Okay, so Nanuka is asking, could we have taken c4? We could have tried, but in this position, I think, despite the fact that it is a fork, black can defend against both threats with knight bd7. So he should probably, I'm not sure where he made his exact mistakes. I think he should probably go queen c7 here. I think b5 actually was an inaccuracy. And, well, the rest was pretty smooth. I mean, knight g5, bishop f3, activating the bishop. And our moves were relatively intuitive. It's just that he played very well. But I think I largely outplayed him. Can't you take on b7 after queen c7? Maybe I actually missed something. Let's see. Oh, that's a great idea, Yazazi, but it doesn't work because the bishop guards d6. So you wanted to do this, I think. But unfortunately, bishop takes d6. And that's a great idea, though. Good tactical recognition. That means you're making progress. Maybe bishop f4 is actually interesting, distracting the queen and taking on a... No, maybe black plays queen e4. This is complicated. But long story short, that is the reason that I played queen b3. Sometimes provoking pawn moves is actually a really good thing. Okay, let's play a couple more and we're going to wrap up soon. I have to sleep pretty early. If he goes queen c8, by the way, there's knight b6 forking the queen and the rook.